I've had many people ask me the question, why don't you support multiculturalism? Because outwardly it seems like it was set up or created for people like myself in a Western society. So this message comes from my heart. The importance of what is and what is not is something we need to understand about multiculturalism. Now, I have lived in many nations, or traveled to many nations, lived in 2 different nations for a period of time, namely Sri Lanka and then in Saudi Arabia, interacted with many religious organizations and groups. And I possibly could stand here and say that I have some level of understanding to explain why multiculturalism will not work in the West. We are, and we can be, a multi-ethnic society. We come from different nations. Our country of birth cannot be changed. When I came into Australia, no one asked me to come to Australia. I chose to come to Australia. Likewise, most immigrants leave their nations because they believe the nation they are migrating into is a better place to live in. As such, when we come into our nation, such as Australia or any other nation we go in to live, we should be able to embrace that nation and become a part of that nation and not expect that nation to assimilate into the nation that I have come from or left, because I believe that it's better for me to leave my home country and come to another nation. So multiculturalism has resulted in many new laws being implemented into many countries, particularly in Australia. One such legislation which came as a result of multiculturalism is known as the racial and religious vilification laws. Now, just to let you understand, multiculturalism on the outlook of it looks really good. But in reality, what it does is it robs the freedom from the country where it's implemented into, meaning the majority of the country pay the price at the cost of accommodating the minorities which come into the country. Now, I am a minority in the country in that sense, but what I'm saying is this is a fair go, Australia, and the law should not restrict us, particularly freedom of speech. The racial and religious vilification laws, which was implemented in January 2002 in the state of Victoria, resulted in the Islamic Council of Victoria, or the Muslim community, taking us to court on vilification charges. Now, just to let you know where multiculturalism really goes mad, is that this law said offense was subjective, not objective. Meaning, if someone got hurt, they could sue me. Now, how do you measure hurt? This means that if I'm talking to someone in a restaurant and a third party listens to my conversation, he or she can claim that they were offended, and then I am guilty until I'm proven innocent. Whereas the Westminster's Code is you're innocent until you're proven guilty. Now, who pays for my legal fees to defend? No one, myself. And this is not good law. So this law resulted in 3 Muslim Anglo-Saxon converts to Islam being sent as spies into a seminar in a church, and we were taken to court in 2002. We were asked to apologize, and I flatly refused to apologize for speaking the truth. And when in the tribunal, when it was brought to the attention of the judge, and the judge looked at me and he wanted to know why I said what I said, because he considered it offensive, I said, Your Honor, if I quoted directly from the Quran, and if what I have said is offensive, don't sanction me. Rather ban the book which says all of those words. So everything seems to be upside down. And this court case went on. In the lower court, we were found guilty based on the legislation in front of the judge, who actually confessed to the fact that it was a setup, but he had to rule according to the piece of legislation in front of him. I want you to understand, these laws are coming because of multiculturalism, and where the majority pays the price. And then we were ordered to apologize to the Muslims and put advertisements for $80,000 saying, we will never speak out or speak about the truth of Islam which is in their holy text. Sorry, I was not game enough for that. So we refused, flatly refused. So we were under threat to go into 6 months in jail for contempt of court. Of course, the media wanted to know what I was going to do, and I said, yes, I will take jail. I will not sacrifice freedom of speech. And people ask me, aren't you worried? Yes, we were a bit concerned because I had several death threats, firebombing threats to my home, my office, threats that my children will be kidnapped if I don't back off. But we thought, if we don't take a stand today, we're going to leave the baggage for the next generation. And I want to make sure that the next generation has a free and democratic society as we enjoyed in Australia. So we took the fight to Supreme Court, and in 2007, the Supreme Court, the 3 judges, unanimously agreed that we had not done anything wrong. And so we were cleared by the 3 judges in the Supreme Court of any wrongdoing. And it was a great win for freedom of speech. Subsequently, this law was about to be passed in South Australia, Western Australia, and New South Wales. It was thrown out of Parliament. The Victorian law was amended. Also, the British Parliament and the US Congress were planning on passing this law, and I was invited to speak to select committees, to the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and also in the US Parliament, the Congress. And we could say today that our court case became a catalyst in stopping this bill from getting through other nations. So we got to fight strong, fight hard, love all people, but not sacrifice our rights. Tolerance does not mean that you compromise your stand. You tolerate, but at a certain point you have to draw the line and say, you come into my country, play the game according to the rules in my land. If you want to do it your way, then find another place. Clear as it can be. So this is bad legislation. 5 years in court, $600,000 in court charges, under much constant threats. Why should this happen in Australia? We need to be careful to protect our nation. Freedom of speech is a fundamental issue. And if multiculturalism is going to curtail freedom of speech, then that's bad. So multiculturalism has been a failure in Europe, and I know it will be a failure in Australia. We need to stand united for a free and democratic society and move forward as a people united under one flag, the Australian flag. Today I call Australia home, and I'm proud to be an Australian. It's our duty as immigrants to assimilate into the way of life of Australia. Today we have people from so many nations who are called Australia home, and thousands of them have assimilated into the way of life of Australia. But it's important to understand also there is a part of society, particularly supported by the left-wing secular ideologies, very strongly pushing towards a multicultural society. So then we got to go back and find out how successful has been multicultural societies. France, England, Germany, Holland. We can learn from the mistakes they have made. Recently, the president of France, Sarkozy, said, multiculturalism is a failure. It's created ethnic enclaves. France, as you would know, if you have been to France, you will know what I'm talking about. There are parts of France where people who are white cannot even walk on some streets because it's no-go zones. It's turned into Islamic Sharia zones, meaning ethnic enclaves have been created. I've been on Current Affairs and I've found some of the footage filmed in Marseille, where I was a part of this particular program on Current Affairs. And the question was asked, how long do you think it will be in Australia before we'll have no-go zones? I pray that we will never have a day like that every Australian will be able to freely travel to any part of Australia and no one will be restricted. Because we called Australia home. We left our nations to come and live in Australia. So France is having a major crisis. Now the president of France has said multiculturalism is a failure. Great Britain today has something like 80+ Sharia codes, and it's supposed to be the creation of the first Sharia zone in England. David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, recently stated that multiculturalism is a failure. Then let's go to Germany. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, stated recently multiculturalism is a failure. What can we do to restore what we have lost? Holland recently passed laws and abolished multiculturalism, as they said multiculturalism is a failure. And they said, if you come into Holland, become Dutch. I think it's a fair call. Now, I lived in Saudi Arabia, and you need to understand, Some of the greatest pushers for greater tolerance are some of the Saudi royal family members. Backdating to 1998, 1999, when there were 31 Christians arrested and put in a prison in Saudi Arabia for praying in their homes. We had a Saudi royal family member, a prince in America, opening a mosque in Los Angeles. During this time, I was lobbying with the US Congress for the release of these Christians, because I lived in Saudi Arabia. And this royal family member's speech at the opening of the mosque was calling on Americans and the West to be greater understanding and greater tolerance towards the people of Islam, while 31 Christians were taken into custody and were in prison for simply praying in their homes. So we see a level of hypocrisy here where we push the West for multiculturalism and tolerance, whereas we don't find that in other parts of the world. The fact of the matter is, one word could destroy millions or nations. And you would ask me, what does that mean? Nazism, as much as it brought hope to some Germans, or many Germans, also brought a level of prestige and pride. While one side of Germany believed in Nazi philosophy, another part of Germans said Hitler is not just going to make it, that he is just a nutcase. The bottom line is, Hitler rose in power, and the end result was more than 10 million people were massacred. One word, Nazism. Then we think of communism and communist ideology, Stalin. Again, it seems to be good philosophy. Everyone embraced it. A lot of people embraced it because it was equality. So the presentation was really good. It seemed good for society. But the outcome, possibly 75 million plus people, were killed. Now, when a word Islam comes, it always makes me wonder. Now we have multiculturalism. Now, what the dangers are is this. Today we know that Islam is culture, religion, and law. So when we embrace a multicultural society, we have to embrace Islamic Sharia law. And I want to tell you this, that I know from experience, the Western governments are pushed to accept Islamic Sharia law. And someone would tell me, but Daniel, it's only just a few crazy Muslims or radicals. I'm sorry, it's very mainstream, because the Islamic Federation of Australia has asked our government to embrace Islamic Sharia law. Now, as much as I know there are tens of thousands of Muslims who don't want Islamic Sharia law, they like our way of life, and that's why they're here. And they should be also rising up and speaking up with me against Islamic Sharia law and the Sharia system. So we cannot embrace Islamic Sharia law in a Western democracy because it's not compatible at all for Western civilization. The rules and the regulations, you ask me, how do you know that? I lived in a Sharia zone, Sharia law in Saudi Arabia. The real Sharia is you chop people's hands off. You chop people's heads off. A man could have 4 wives. A wife could be divorced by simply saying talal, talal, talal 3 times. And these are the serious parts of Islamic Sharia law. Also, what you need to understand is in the Sharia court system, a man's testimony, 2 women's testimony is equal to a man's testimony. In other words, 2 women are needed to give their testimonies to be equal to 1 man's testimony. Now, where is justice in this system? And this is already happening in Europe right now. And the women have no rights under Sharia. We need to keep our laws in place. We don't need a subsequent law to come into our country. Another very negative component, or a very interesting component of Sharia law, is the fact that the man has the right to beat the wife. Now, we don't believe that in Australia. And we need to protect our women. If we give Sharia law, there are many Muslim women who are beaten by their husbands. At least now they have an opportunity to come out and talk to someone. If Sharia law is given to them, they'll be told that they cannot come into the normal legal system. They need to mind their affairs amongst the Muslim judges.